Right, the next stage of our rigging is to bind the polygon model to the skeleton and then play about with the skin weights to make sure that the model deforms nicely with the skeleton. To do this, we need to make sure our mesh is selectable. So I put it on a layer. I've turned the reference off now so I can select it again. You want to pick the topmost bone in the skeleton hierarchy. And what it will do is it will go down the hierarchy and it will basically weight any vertex that is close to a specific joint. So sort of vertices around here will be weighted to these joints and so on. And it starts at the topmost bone and works its way down. So we hold shift down and select multi-select, so we select the mesh as well. It doesn't matter which order you select things in, but do make sure you select the topmost bone in your hierarchy. You can actually determine specific bones to be weighted, but at this stage we just want to do the whole skeleton. Okay, so both of those things are selected. Make sure you're in the rigging drop down, go to skin, bind skin and the options. And all we want to do is change the maximum influences down to 3 and the drop-off rate, I always put that up to 10. The maximum influences is the number of joints that can affect one vertex. Each vertex will have a weight value that will total or has to add up to 1. And how that is distributed across different joints is dependent on where they are in the location to those joints kind of thing. So a vertex would have 50%, 0.5 assigned to this joint and 0.5 assigned to that. It means it will move kind of 50% if that joint moves. If that joint moves, it will move 100% because obviously the joint above it's moving as well. I hope that makes sense. If a vertex was just a value of 1 to one joint, it will just move everywhere that joint goes. It's almost like it's parented to it. But with vertex weights, it allows you to have a vertex influenced by more than one joint. So you get some kind of mesh deformation, sort of squishiness to it. So it kind of resembles a kind of, a basic kind of skin kind of thing. I hope that makes sense, but the way to try these things out is to play about with it. So once you've got those selected, you've got that maximum influence set to 3, drop-off rate to 10, leave everything else alone and just go apply. And now you can see the joints have gone multicolored and our mesh, when we pick a joint, our mesh goes purple. And that means it's got history associated with the mesh. Now this is good history. This is history that we don't want to delete because if we delete the history off the mesh now, we lose all our skin weights, okay, and we'd have to rebind it. So that's what we do. We make sure we get all that construction history gone. And then when we start rigging, we have history that we need to leave because it's got this relationship between it and the skeleton. So we now move the skeleton. Look, the character moves. If we bend it, the character moves with it. We can multi-select joints, so I can use the shift key to just see how these all work, and I can just bend them all together like this. I just select that. I'm just middle dragging to select, to rotate them without actually dragging on the manipulator tool. So look, he deforms okay. It's not too bad. We can try him in this axis like so. It's not too bad. And then we can see how well the arms work. It's a low poly model, so you have some issues around shoulders and that, but the main thing is to try to keep the kind of silhouette looking good. You can see it's sort of scrunching up a little bit there, but it's not too bad for this kind of thing. So that's the basics of sort of getting your skin weights working. If at any point you just want to reset it, you can select the mesh or the bones and go skin and go to bind pose, and you see it goes back to the pose in which it was bound to the skeleton. So it's a good way of resetting it. Okay, but you do need to keep the history. As soon as I delete the history, if I delete the history off this model, so if I go up here and delete the history, it has no relationship with the skeleton again. It's lost that influence. So you have to be careful with these because you can spend a lot of time getting all your weighting working right, and then if you accidentally delete history, you'll lose everything that you've just done. So look, this all deforms nicely. The next stage of things is to make sure the skinning is working nicely. So let's have a look at the head to start off with. So if we bend this, you can see his chin is kind of skewing a bit. And what it means is that these vertices that are associated with his chin have got a bit of weight on the neck as well. So if he wanted to move his head about, if we move the neck about, you'll probably see they all move together fine. They're not too bad. But there's obviously these verts here have got some influence on here and some influence on here. So to change those, let's just put it back to its bind pose. First of all, I put some animation on it. It's the best way to work. So I go to frame 1. Let's just work on the head. I'll key it there. At frame 10, I'll key it over here. At frame 20, I'll key it over there. And at frame 30, it's a good way of working because then you can just sort of flick through your animation keyframes just to see how the mesh is deforming at each step of the way. So look, I've got a little bit of animation on my character now. Every 10 frames I've got a pose. Okay, and the next thing we want to do is bring up the paint weights tool. And what we need to do to get this working is we need to pick our mesh, and if we go to the rigging shelf, it's this tool here. It's the one with the little paintbrush on it. It also lives in skin and paint skin weights, like so. And we need to bring up the options for this. You can do it in this menu here, but if you use the icon, like so, so pick the mesh again, and we use this icon. I'm into skin weights mode, but I haven't got my toolbox up, so I'm going to click on the little hammer icon, and I'll bring up my toolbox. And mine appears over here. You can adjust where that appears if you want to. You can unlock and bind things so they appear on the interface wherever you want them, but always make sure you lock it again so you don't start moving bits of your interface around. And this shows me, this gives me a sort of graphical representation of what influence a joint has got. So at the moment it's got the root joint selected, and the white area shows that these are the vertices that are most influenced by that selected joint. Okay, so you can see the fall off goes from to grey, so maybe these verts have got a little bit of influence, but these ones have got none, they're black. So they have no influence from this selected joint here. You can select the joints and see the influences by just selecting here, or you can right click over the joints. So right click over them and go select influence. Okay, so that's the chest joint. So I want to concentrate on the head joint. Now this is my brush, okay, and whenever you've got a joint selected, you can then start to brush the influence. So you're basically changing that value of 0 to 1 on every vertex that you're brushing over. Okay, so what I want to do, I can change the brush size by holding the B key down, so the B for beta, and I can drag it left and right like so. Okay, so we're going to zoom in on the head and focus on that area. So I'm going to select the head and go select influence, and we can have a look at this. Okay, and you can see these verts here are not quite white, they've gone a little bit of grey, so let's make the brush size a bit smaller. And there's a lot of menus in here, but you don't have to worry about too many of them. The most important one is the opacity and the value. And the value is the total amount it will paint onto a vertex. So if it's set to 1, you can keep painting until that vertex is 100% influenced by the selected joint. Okay, you can cap it, you could change it down to 5, and it means that it will stop. It might remove value. If this vertex is 100% already weighted, it will actually remove value and set it down to 0.5, but it will paint the remaining 0.5 onto another bone. It always has to add up to 1. The influence of a vertex always has to add up to 1, so it will paint it somewhere else, probably onto the next bone nearest to it. If you change it to 0, it will remove the value on a vertex. So look, I can have a look at this, and this is removing that influence of this bone here, and I think it's painting it probably onto this bone here. Okay, so the value is kind of, you know, as it says, it adjusts the value it's painting onto it. The opacity is the brush strength. So if you just want to do small values, you change this down to about 0.1 or 0.2, and it will just do small amounts. So look, I've got this set to 0.1, sorry, its value set to 1, so it's going to add influence, and I'm going to just do it nice and slowly, and you can see it's slowly moving to the position of this joint. When it's 100% weighted to this joint, it will be in exactly the same position as that joint, so the head won't be squished or deformed. The head should be in its original shape. So I can do this more quickly by setting this up like so. And if we watch this vertex down here, look, that goes to that position and it whitens it. You can see some of these are a bit grey because they've got influence of that top head joint there. It's not a problem because that top head bone moves everywhere this goes. Now, if I do attach a hat to that at some point and I want him to sort of lift his hat up in the air, I don't want his forehead to go with it. So it look a bit weird. So I might want to change it eventually. So let's spin him around. Let's do the back of his head as well. And look, you can see now that those kind of verts are moving 100% with that joint. Okay, so we have a look. What's nice about having that animation is you don't have to come out of this tool and select the joints. You can just do this and you can see what it's doing. So it's not too bad. We could say that we don't want his turtleneck sweater kind of thing moving with the head joint. Okay, so we could remove that influence. But I think the best way to do it is, rather than remove influence, is add it to the bone you want. You don't. Sometimes when you remove influence, you don't know which bone it's sending the removed influence to. So let's select this. And let's increase the influence of the neck joint over his collar. Okay, so you can see on the left hand side here it's working, and on this side, if we just spin him around, I'm just clicking on these to get that working. And so it's not too bad now. Okay, you're fine with a low poly model. It'll go, you know, you get some intersection and stuff like that, but the most important thing is that it keeps its volume, that it doesn't sort of collapse into itself and lose the volume of the shape. Okay, so that's the most important thing. Once you're happy with that, you can move on to another part of it. I would now press Q to cancel the tool and put some more animation on my character. And I always do the animation in stages. So let's put him back to 0. So back at 50, look, I'm just going to hold shift down and type in 0, and then I'll just key that at this point here. So he goes back to that rest position, and then we'll start working on his arm. So I might do his arm sort of bending down like this, and then bending forward like this. And this is where arm joints are problematic, because they do two lots of sort of 90 degrees. They go from down to here, then to there. So they can sometimes be problematic. You won't get great results with a low poly model. You just have to try and, like I said, keep the volume of it looking good. So we'll have a look, see what we can do with this. So I pick the model again, I go into paint weights mode. Let's bring up, I just pressed the wrong button there. I pressed totally the wrong button. I pressed this button there, it looks very similar. So I want this one, which is the paint weights. I think this one creates what's called clusters, which is I won't even bother explaining it to you at the moment. So right, we're back into paint weights, and let's have a look. So we're having a look at this joint here. So let's select that one as our influence. So right clicking over it, select as influence, and let's have a look what it does. So at this point in the animation, it's not too bad. But I probably want these verts to not be influenced by so much. So I've got to determine what influence I want them to be onto. And the normal sort of rule of thumb is that if it's moving too much, you need to apply the influence to the joint that's above the one that it's moving with. So at the moment, that's the chest joint. Okay, if it's not moving enough, then the influence needs to be increased on the moving joint. Okay, so at the moment, if this is moving too much, we want it more anchored to the chest joint, not to the neck joint, to the chest joint, the one that's above it in the hierarchy. So we'll select that as our area of influence. And I'm going to change the opacity and the value. I'll keep the value at 1, but I want the opacity down to low. So we can just brush gently and just see what the vertices do. So I've got this chest joint selected, and then I'll just brush it there. And you can just see these are moving back towards the chest joint, like so. So they're not scrunching up so much with that shoulder movement. So that's not too bad. You can spend ages just sort of adjusting these and getting them how you want them, but the best thing is to just experiment. Just focus on like 2 joints, the chest joint and say the shoulder joint, and just see, put some animation on it. You don't want to work with no animation because you can't see how the joints are affecting the vertices. You need some animation on it to see exactly how the vertices are changing, how the weighting is changing, and how it's affected by the joint movement. You can mirror vertex weights across, so you don't have to do them for both sides. If the model is symmetrical, it should mirror them across fine. If I put it back to kind of its rest pose like this and pick the model, and I've got it selected, and if you go to skin, you've got mirror skin weights here. I'll have a look at the options here, and again, it's a bit like the mirror skeleton tool. We want it on the Y, Z axis, and it does here, look, it says here direction positive to negative, so plus X is everything on the red side of X, so this side here is going to copy all of these weights over onto this side over here, so it should work. Okay, so we just go apply, and I've got no error message, so hopefully it's all okay, and we should see then, like if I put the arm into this position here, if I put that shoulder into that joint there, you can see it's the same. Before we did any weighting, these verts here on the shoulder were moving a lot more, and you can see it's copied those across. So that's quite good. So you can spend ages sort of getting this working. If ever it all goes horribly wrong and you get very confused, just set your model back to its bind position. So pick the mesh and go skin, go to bind pose, delete its history, and that will get rid of all the skin weights off it. Good to get it back into its bind pose before you do that, and then just reapply them and start again. On a simple model like this, it won't take too long. But that kind of shows you the absolute basics of binding skins and also using the paint weights tool.